One cultural character, for whom the previously discussed concepts of eternal recurrence and of living in the present holds great gravity, is none other than the clown prince of crime, the ace of knaves, the Joker. Though there have been many and varied versions of his history and of the events that led to his becoming the Joker presented in comics and film, none of these have ever been adopted or accepted as canonical truth, and indeed, they have been willfully contradicted and understood as ephemeral and unreliable accounts. It is one of the most critical and crucial elements of the Joker's character that he is ultimately without origin, and despite his enormously iconic nature, he's proven a mutable property over the years, having been presented as a predatory pederast, a reasonably harmless prankster, and most frequently, as an artful, schizophrenic mass murderer. And perhaps the greatest piece of Joker literature, Alan Moore's 1988 one-off, The Killing Joke, the narrative's focus is on the intemperance and frailty of sanity and moral code. In the story, the Joker attempts to drive the seemingly psychically concrete Commissioner Gordon mad by subjecting him to a barrage of horrific sensory information, including large photographs of his own critically wounded and disrobed daughter. His adage, the Joker's, is that any man can have one really bad day and end up just like me. Says critic Jeff Cluck, both Batman and the Joker are creations of a random and tragic one bad day. Batman spends his life forging meaning from the random tragedy, whereas the Joker reflects the absurdity of life and all its random injustice. The Joker also serves as an unreliable narrator. He admits to his own uncertainty as he has disparate memories of his own past. He says, sometimes I remember it one way, sometimes another. If I'm going to have a past, I prefer it be multiple choice. Accentuating the comic's depiction of a world unraveling towards relentless urban violence and moral nihilism. Also contained in this volume is some of the more artful dealings with the elements of eternal recurrence that appear frequently over the years in the relationship between the Joker and Batman. One could say, in fact, that the idea of eternal recurrence is present in a great deal of comics literature in which characters are often in a constant present and maintain the same age for decades. In the book's first scene, Batman speaks to the Joker in his cell, stating his understanding of the fatalistic but unending path the two of them are locked in, one which finds them perpetually in the process of nearly killing each other, but which could never end until one of them actually dies. I'm going to interject here, again, from the fourth part of Spinoza's Treatise on Ethics. Fourth part, Proposition 15. Desire which arises from a true knowledge of good and evil can be extinguished or restrained by many other desires which take their origin from the affected emotions by which we are agitated. Demonstration. From the true knowledge of good and evil, insofar as this is an affect, necessarily arises desire, which is greater in proportion as the affect from which it springs. But this desire, by hypothesis, because it springs from our understanding something truly, follows therefore in us insofar as we act, and therefore must be understood by our essence alone. Important point. And consequently, its strength and increase must be limited by human power alone. But the desires which spring from the affects by which we are agitated and greater as the affects themselves are greater, and therefore their strength and increase must be limited by the power of external causes, a power which, if it be compared with our own, indefinitely surpasses it. The desires, therefore, which take their origin from such affects as these may be much stronger than that which takes its origin from a true knowledge of good and evil, and the former may be able to restrain and extinguish the latter. Proposition 16. The desire which springs from a knowledge of good and evil can be easily extinguished or restrained insofar as this knowledge is connected with the future by the desire of things which in the present are sweet. Demonstration. The affect towards an object which we imagine as future is weaker than towards that which we imagine as present. But the desire which springs from a true knowledge of good and evil, even though the knowledge be of objects which are good at the present time, may be extinguished or restrained by any causal desire. and therefore the desire which springs from a knowledge of good and evil, insofar as this knowledge is connected with the future, can be easily restrained or extinguished. Proposition 17. The desire which springs from a true knowledge of good and evil can be still more easily restrained, insofar as this knowledge is connected with objects which are contingent by the desire of objects which are present. In these propositions, I consider that I have explained why men are more strongly influenced by an opinion than by true reason, and why the true knowledge of good and evil causes disturbance in the mind, and often gives way to every kind of lust, whence the saying of the poet, Video meliora proboque deteriora sequor, or I see the better way and approve it, but I follow the worse way. The same thought appears to have been in the mind of the preacher when he said, He that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. I say these things not because I would be understood to conclude, therefore, that it is better to be ignorant than to be wise, or that the wise man is governing his passions is nothing better than the fool, but I say them because it is necessary for us to know both the strength and weakness of our nature, so that we may determine what reasons can do, we can determine what reason can do and what it cannot do in governing our affects. In the above excerpts and many others, Spinoza presents us with an exhaustive treatise on these essential truths, the grossly unstable nature of one's conception of good and evil, and the ways in which these conceptions are highly susceptible to transformative influence from other affects. In another seminal piece of Joker literature, 1989's Arkham Asylum, writer Grant Morrison suggests that the Joker's mental state is in fact a previously unprecedented form of supersanity, a form of ultrasensory perception. It also suggests that he has no true personality of his own, that on any given day he can be a harmless clown or a vicious killer, depending on which would benefit him the most. So we see here some of the most beautiful and philosophical elements of this fictional creation, that he is arguably operating at a higher and more truthful level of moral judgment and decision-making